How could you lie about this being my grandchild? From the start, my daughter didn't resemble my husband. By the time she turned 3, it was obvious she looked even less like him. My mother-in-law found this suspicious and secretly conducted a DNA test between my husband and our daughter. When she showed me the results, she had a triumphant look on her face. Now I can officially kick you out. Not only did you fail to get us a male heir, but you also tried to pass off another man's child as our grandchild. You're a disgrace. Get out. As I listened to my mother-in-law's heated speech, I tilted my head, confused. Let's calm down. This child isn't even my biological daughter. I told her and showed her the evidence to prove it. My mother-in-law started trembling. I thought she might admit her mistake, but instead, she twisted the situation to suit her needs. My dream for the future was to become a mother with many children. When I was in elementary school, other kids also wanted to become parents, but as we progressed through junior high and high school, their dreams shifted to careers or hobbies. Despite this, my dream stayed the same. I wanted a family surrounded by children. A friend from college once said, "If you love kids so much, why not become a kindergarten teacher?" Nowadays, it seems like women who get married, have children, and stay home are the ones getting the short end of the stick. Even if you go to college, get a good job, and build a career, everything seems to go to waste if you get married and pregnant. I understood the opinions around me, but I still had a strong desire to have and raise children over having a career. By the time I reached my junior year of college, I started job hunting earnestly and graduated with a job lined up at a decent company. Once I started working, I faced the harsh reality of the working world, realizing how naive my student days had been. I was constantly busy with work. In my 3rd year at the company, I got transferred to another branch where I met my husband. He was like a mentor to me, and we spent a lot of time working together. Eventually, this led to a personal relationship. The catalyst was our mutual love for children. My husband was considered quite handsome, attracting the attention of the young female employees at the branch. None of the women at work approached him, assuming a guy that good-looking must already have a girlfriend. When word got out that we were dating, many of them regretted not making a move. After about 2 years together, we started thinking about marriage. Being in my late 20s and wanting at least 3 kids, I felt it was the right time. Everything moved along smoothly. My husband and I wanted children, so we got tested for genetic diseases. I have a much younger brother who inherited our father's allergies, though these were different and caused him a lot of trouble growing up. I also got tested but didn't inherit any. Seeing my brother's struggles, I didn't want my own kids to go through the same thing. However, the results surprised us. Neither of us had hereditary allergies, but it turned out my husband was infertile. I was perfectly healthy, and when I learned we couldn't have children together, I felt lost. It would have been easier if the situation were reversed. My husband apologized, saying I could leave him since he couldn't fulfill my dream of having children. But I wasn't in a dreamy phase anymore. Dreams are dreams, reality is reality. I chose a life with him over a family with children. He was the only one for me, and I couldn't imagine a future with anyone else. So, we got married, set up a new home, and started our life together. My father-in-law was kind and welcoming, saying he'd always wanted a daughter. However, my mother-in-law was different. I expected some friction, but I underestimated her. She would visit when my husband was at work and talk about wanting a grandchild soon. Then, she started criticizing me for not giving birth to an heir, saying harsh things even though I wasn't pregnant. She nitpicked my housework, pointing out minor flaws, and even told me to quit my job, blaming society's nonsense about women advancing for creating useless daughters-in-law like me. The stress turned into fear, causing my heart rate to skyrocket, and I nearly hyperventilated. I confided everything to my husband but couldn't explain well because just recalling my mother-in-law's words made me tremble. My husband didn't think it was that important. He suggested keeping my distance or telling her not to come over when he wasn't home. When he found out she was pressuring me about having a grandchild, he didn't want her to know about his infertility. He was worried she'd bother him about it. I thought if he just told her, things would settle down. My husband is generally a kind and good person. He might still feel guilty about not being able to give me the children I wanted. Raised by a mother like that, he may have been told he needed a male heir to properly inherit the family estate. His father's side of the family is wealthy, and knowing the heavy burden he carried, I couldn't push back any harder. Reluctantly, I tried to keep my distance from my mother-in-law and avoided her when my husband wasn't around. Amid all this, I developed a small circular bald spot about the size of a dime. Then my husband got transferred to another location. When we got married, I was moved to a different department. My husband told me I didn't need to quit my job and follow him, but staying in that house meant continuing to deal with my mother-in-law, which was unbearable. So I decided to quit and move with him. The new place had a lot of undeveloped land, and the residents were very welcoming, so I quickly adapted. Most importantly, it was far from my in-laws' house, so my mother-in-law couldn't just drop by to be unpleasant. This alone reduced my stress and my bald spot improved. The air and food were great, and I even gained a little weight. I felt like I was finally living life the way I wanted. Once settled, I found a new job at an after-school care program. For someone like me who wanted kids, but couldn't have them, it was like finding a new purpose. In college, I had obtained a childcare qualification, not to become a childcare worker, but because I thought it would be useful for raising children. Although not required, the program appreciated my qualification and suggested I get a specialized after-school care qualification. I decided to take the job more seriously and talked to my husband, who supported me, saying it sounded like a great idea. Over a year passed as I took courses and worked toward getting the qualification. The area we lived in had excellent welfare for children and various kinds of support. We were able to welcome a newborn daughter into our lives. My husband was overjoyed, calling it a near miraculous stroke of luck. I believed that if I hadn't been working at my current job, this wouldn't have happened. Perhaps we were given trials so we could meet our daughter. My husband quickly informed his parents. I had never seen him happier and more excited. However, either my husband explained poorly or my mother-in-law failed to understand because the situation took a drastic turn when our daughter turned 2. My husband got transferred again, and we moved back near his parents. He got a promotion and returned to his old branch. My in-laws wanted to see our daughter, so we visited them more often. With his promotion, my husband had more subordinates and wasn't away from home as much. I thought my mother-in-law's harassment would be manageable since my husband was with us during visits. Initially, she adored our daughter, but her joy didn't last long. She started asking, "When will you show us a boy? Don't think you're off the hook just because you had one grandchild." I never intended to irritate my mother-in-law, but she still seemed to dislike me. She accused me of keeping my pregnancy a secret and being shady for only reporting after the birth. She called me an inconsiderate daughter-in-law, saying I should have informed her when I got pregnant. Even though my husband explained everything to her, she pretended not to understand and kept making such comments. Gradually, her dissatisfaction extended to our daughter. She remarked that daughters resemble their fathers, but claimed our daughter looked nothing like her son. She made these comments deliberately, not just to me but also to others. She even pushed my daughter away, saying, "Don't come here with your dirty hands." During meals at my in-laws' house, she scolded my daughter for spilling food and hit the back of her hand several times, saying she had no manners. "Sorry, I'll make sure to teach her better manners later. Please forgive her," I said, defending my daughter. But my mother-in-law blamed me for spoiling her and even hit my head several times. When my father-in-law or my husband was present, she didn't treat us as harshly. My daughter began to fear her grandmother, saying, "Grandma is scary," and started avoiding her. My mother-in-law then called her an ungrateful grandchild and treated her even more coldly. Thankfully, my father-in-law remained affectionate toward my daughter, and she grew very attached to him. Every time we visited, my mother-in-law would nag me about not being pregnant and pressured me to have a son soon. When I didn't get pregnant, she even started suggesting potential wives for my husband. "How about this girl? She has a sturdy build and looks like she could have several children. This type is more likely to bear a male child." Only my husband was invited to their house, and he would always return saying his mother had suggested this. At first, he thought she was joking, but as she kept repeating it, he started to believe there was some agreement behind it, and came to consult me. I told my husband that ever since we moved back, my mother-in-law had been relentlessly pressuring me to have a son. I also mentioned how she was treating our daughter very coldly, using the excuse of discipline to inflict what was practically corporal punishment. I explained that our daughter was afraid of her grandmother. In the end, my mother-in-law's attitude hadn't changed since our wedding. If anything, it had worsened. Her behavior toward our daughter was particularly blatant, and the thought of what she might have done when I wasn't around was terrifying. My husband realized how painful it was to be constantly pressured by his mother about having a son. He apologized for previously suggesting we simply keep our distance and asked for forgiveness, albeit a bit late. Some pains can't be understood until you experience them. I told him it was understandable, and we decided that our daughter and I would avoid visiting my in-laws as much as possible. My husband continued to visit his parents whenever his mother called. My mother-in-law's actions were a humiliating ordeal, but my husband assured me he had no intention of divorcing me. He said he would find the right time to address his mother's behavior. However, he always returned home saying that today wasn't the right time. I knew my husband had no plans for divorce or remarriage, and I thought it best for him to handle his mother. So, I wasn't worried about him visiting his parents. But unexpectedly, things took a turn in my mother-in-law's favor. Previously, she had only shown my husband photos of potential remarriage candidates. This time, however, she went so far as to introduce one of the candidates to him in person. Unintentionally, the woman fell in love with my husband at first sight. My husband, still as handsome as ever, remained polite even to someone he didn't want to engage with. While I believe my husband wouldn't say anything he didn't mean, it's possible my mother-in-law twisted his words. With everything going her way, my mother-in-law's actions escalated. This happened when our daughter turned 3. My father-in-law wanted to celebrate her birthday, and since my husband and I didn't want to have the party at their house, we asked him to wait a bit, saying we'd celebrate later. "Dad has prepared for the birthday party. Today's your day off, right? Come over with our granddaughter." Feeling guilty about rejecting my father-in-law's plans, we decided to visit with our daughter. When we arrived, my father-in-law wasn't there. Instead, my mother-in-law was there with a woman she had chosen as a potential new wife for my husband. I had a DNA test done on my son and granddaughter. They looked nothing alike, so I had my doubts. The results confirmed it. "You've been lying about your child's paternity. You have enough proof to demand a divorce." She then turned to my husband, accusing him of being deceived and insisting that I was unfit to be his wife, pushing for a divorce. The potential new wife joined in, chanting, "Divorce." I was honestly stunned. Taking advantage of my silence, my mother-in-law and the potential new wife said whatever they pleased. It all sounded like noise to me. It wasn't that I couldn't argue back, I was just too stunned to bother. I composed myself, took out a piece of paper, and showed it to my mother-in-law, saying, "I hate to burst your bubble, but it's no wonder our daughter doesn't look like my husband. She's not even my biological child." The paper I showed her was a copy of the adoption papers, proving that we had adopted our daughter. Knowing my mother-in-law wouldn't understand an explanation, my husband and I decided it was best to carry a copy of the document for moments like this. Our daughter doesn't know the truth yet. She might have some suspicions, but we don't plan to hide it from her. You deceived us. We welcomed her because you said she was our grandchild, and she turned out to be a stranger's child. That's worse than having an affair. My mother-in-law accused me of bringing a child from unknown origins into the family. My husband then shouted, "Shut up." I explained that we adopted our daughter. How did you twist that into her being a child from an affair? Are you out of your mind? Injured by his mother's heartless words, my husband was harsh but quickly calmed down and revealed what he had never told her. I'm the one who can't have children. My wife is completely blameless. He showed his mother a copy of the test results from before our marriage and confessed that he had asked me not to tell her, knowing it was his fault she couldn't have a biological grandchild. My mother-in-law was speechless and slumped over, realizing she was the only one who hadn't known. She seemed unable to process everything. My husband then declared he was cutting ties with her. Even if it was a misunderstanding, you pushed us to the brink and harassed a little child. That's inexcusable. He criticized her for crossing the line too many times. Even faced with her beloved son cutting her off, my mother-in-law barely reacted, possibly not even comprehending it. With nothing more to say, we left. That night, my father-in-law called. When he asked what had happened while he was away, we told him everything, and he came to our house immediately. He apologized for my mother-in-law's behavior to both me and our daughter. Our daughter, not fully understanding, simply said, "If Grandpa says it's okay, then it's okay." I couldn't be that forgiving. All I could manage was to say, "I understand." The things my mother-in-law had said and done to me felt like hell. A few days later, my mother-in-law, who should have understood that my husband had cut ties with her, suddenly barged into our house yelling. She even brought along my husband's supposed new wife. It was clear she hadn't grasped my husband's declaration at all. "You must have threatened my son into saying that, right? He's a kind boy and is just feeling sorry for you, protecting you out of pity," she shouted. The woman chimed in, agreeing and shouting like a backup choir, "We're here to save my son, the victim, from the clutches of this evil wife." My mother-in-law raised her hand toward my daughter, who had peeked out from her room. My daughter cowered in fear, and I shielded her with my body, but the blow I was expecting never came. When I looked up, my husband was standing between us, protecting us. A deep voice boomed from another room, and my father-in-law, who had been hiding, came rushing out. "What did our granddaughter ever do to you?" "Accept reality already," he said, standing in front of my mother-in-law, protecting us. My mother-in-law, who hadn't expected him to be there, was stunned and speechless. Hearing about the previous incidents, my father-in-law had grown suspicious and decided to monitor my mother-in-law and the woman's actions. He sensed something was wrong and informed us of their plans, so today's confrontation was anticipated. The only unexpected thing was that my daughter, startled by my mother-in-law's voice, peeked out despite being told to stay hidden. When my father-in-law sensed what was happening, he hid in another room to observe my mother-in-law and the woman's actions. He hadn't planned to reveal himself but couldn't stand by when he saw his wife raising her hand against our daughter. Are you blind? How could a family this united be torn apart? Wake up already, my father-in-law said. He then told my mother-in-law that he knew all her secrets and took her and the woman away. A few days later, my father-in-law called me. The content of the call was about the secret he had mentioned before he left. He explained that he had always suspected my mother-in-law was hiding something due to her strange behavior. However, since it didn't cause any major problems, he overlooked it. She had taken care of the house while he was away for work, and he appreciated that. But the sudden appearance of a potential new wife for his son confused him. So after that incident, he hired a private investigator to look into her behavior. The investigation revealed that she had been having an affair for several years. My father-in-law had suspected something was amiss but never imagined it was an affair, which was a shock. However, his shock turned to anger when he learned the identity of the potential new wife. She was the daughter of my mother-in-law's lover. My mother-in-law had no intention of divorcing my wealthy father-in-law or ending her affair. She figured that if her lover's daughter married her son, they would become relatives, making it easier to continue the affair. It was all part of her plan. The other potential wives my husband had been shown were women she found on matchmaking sites. She had registered on those sites using my husband's name without his knowledge. Moreover, the lover's daughter didn't know her father was having an affair with my mother-in-law. Her father had suggested the match, and she fell for my husband at first sight, being attracted to his looks. The idea of marrying off their children was suggested by my mother-in-law to her lover. My father-in-law couldn't trust my mother-in-law's excuses or her claim that she wasn't divorcing him for his money, so he decided to divorce her. He also said that having someone like her around was bad for our daughter's upbringing. His resolve was firm, and despite my mother-in-law's desperate apologies, he remained unmoved. The mother-in-law, who had always been combative toward me, suddenly turned meek and asked for my help. "Your father-in-law adores you and our granddaughter. If you persuade him, I'm sure he'll change his mind." She begged me to stop the divorce. But after all the torment she put me and my daughter through, I owed her nothing. I'm not that knave. My husband, our daughter, and I have all been deeply hurt by you. Isn't there something you should say before asking for help? Even if she apologized now, it wouldn't change anything. But instead of apologizing, she betrayed us again. Did I do something wrong? Sure, having an affair while married is a bit regrettable, but your lack of explanation about the adoption is at fault here. I'm not to blame. Hearing this, my husband threw her out without hesitation, even throwing salt at her to ward off bad luck. Though my father-in-law had given her time to find a new place, he revoked it and filed for divorce immediately upon hearing her words. He also sued both my mother-in-law and her lover for damages. The lover's wife found out about the affair through the lawsuit and the details of her daughter's involvement with my husband, leading to further turmoil in their household. I heard that my mother-in-law's lover had married into his wife's wealthy family, and it caused a huge scandal. He was divorced and required to pay significant alimony. Despite her parents' situation, the potential wife arranged by my mother-in-law continued to aggressively pursue my husband. She was so persistent, even approaching our daughter while she was playing in the park, that we had to get a restraining order through our lawyer. After being kicked out of the family home and divorced, my mother-in-law started working to pay off the alimony. She managed to settle the alimony with my father-in-law from their property division, but she couldn't cover the large sum demanded by her lover's wife. Now she's experiencing her first job, living alone in an old house with thin walls where she can hear everything from the neighbors. She fails constantly at her job and is frequently scolded. The tables have turned, and now she's the one being called a loser and a fool, terms she used to mock me with. After over 50 years, she's finally experiencing a miserable existence. Our family has grown even closer. Our daughter laughs a lot now and shows interest in many things. Watching her grow is our greatest joy. My father-in-law visits regularly and has become a doting grandfather.
The shattering of glass pierced the silence of our living room. A framed photo lay smashed on the hardwood floor, the shards of glass glinting like tiny daggers. My hands trembled as I stared at the intruder standing before me, a woman clutching the hand of a young boy, his eyes wide with confusion. Richard, my husband of 23 years, stepped forward, his face ashen. "Dana, this is Jenna, and Lucas. They're my family too." The words hung in the air, a suffocating weight pressing against my chest. I opened my mouth, but no sound escaped. How could this be happening? My perfect life, the life I had fought so hard to build, was crumbling before my eyes. "You have another family?" I finally managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. "How could you do this to us?" Richard's gaze dropped to the floor, unable to meet mine. "I'm sorry, Dana. I never meant for it to go this far." Jenna shifted uncomfortably, her grip on Lucas tightening. "Richard told me you knew about us. He said you were okay with the arrangement." My heart pounded in my ears as I struggled to comprehend the depth of his deception. Anger surged through me, burning away the shock. "You lied to her too? You're a coward, Richard, a coward and a liar!" Amelia, our 22-year-old daughter, emerged from her bedroom, her eyes wide with confusion. "Mom, what's going on?" Before I could respond, Richard stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Amelia, honey, I have something to tell you." "Save it," I snapped, my voice trembling with rage. "You've done enough damage. Get out of our house, Richard. Get out and never come back." Amelia's brow furrowed, and she looked from me to Richard, her gaze finally settling on Jenna and the child. Understanding dawned on her face, and her expression hardened. "You sick bastard," she spat, her words dripping with venom. Richard flinched as if struck. "Amelia, please, let me explain." "No," I shouted, my voice raw. "You don't get to explain anything. You've been living a lie, and now the truth is out. You made your choices, Richard, and now you have to face the consequences." Jenna's grip on Lucas loosened, and she took a tentative step forward. "Dana, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." I held up a hand, cutting her off. "Just go. Take your son and get out of my house. I don't want to see either of you ever again." Tears welled in Jenna's eyes, but she nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. She turned and fled, Lucas trailing behind her, casting one last bewildered glance over his shoulder. Richard stood motionless, his face a mask of anguish. "Dana, please, we can work through this. I love you." I shook my head, my heart shattering with each word. "No, Richard. You lost the right to love me the moment you betrayed our family. Our marriage is over." As the weight of my words settled over us, a heavy silence descended. In that moment, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The life I had known, the love I had cherished, was gone, shattered like the broken frame on the floor. The weeks following Richard's departure were a blur. Amelia and I existed in a state of numb disbelief, the weight of his betrayal suffocating us with each passing day. We tried to resume our normal routines, but the empty spaces he left behind served as constant reminders of the life we had lost. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, staring vacantly at a stack of unpaid bills, Amelia emerged from her room, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, her voice quivering with barely contained anger. I looked up, my heart sinking at the expression on her face. "What is it, honey?" Amelia tossed a thick manila envelope onto the table, scattering the bills. "I found this in Dad's office. It's everything. Bank statements, credit card receipts, proof of his double life." I reached for the envelope with trembling hands, dread coiling in my stomach. As I rifled through the contents, a sickening realization dawned on me. Richard hadn't just been unfaithful. He had been embezzling from his company, siphoning funds to support his secret family. "That bastard," Amelia spat, her fists clenched at her sides. "He's been lying to us for years, Mom. He's been stealing, cheating, and God knows what else." I felt bile rise in my throat as the full extent of Richard's deception became clear. "How could he do this to us?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Amelia's expression hardened, her eyes blazing with determination. "He's going to pay for this, Mom. We're going to make sure he pays." I stared at her, uncertainty gnawing at me. "What are you saying, Amelia?" She leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "I'm saying we expose him for the lying, thieving scumbag he is. We take all this evidence to his company, to the police. We burn his life to the ground, just like he did to ours." A part of me recoiled at the thought of such vengeance, but another, darker part couldn't deny the appeal of seeing Richard suffer the consequences of his actions. "What about Jenna and the kid?" I asked, my voice trembling. "They're caught up in this, too." Amelia's expression softened, just for a moment. "We'll reach out to Jenna. Maybe she'll see reason and help us take him down." I nodded slowly, my mind whirling with 1,000 different thoughts and emotions. "Okay," I said finally, my resolve hardening. "We'll do it. We'll make him pay for what he's done." Amelia's grim smile sent a shiver down my spine. "Good. It's time we showed that lying piece of garbage what happens when you mess with the Whitaker women." As she turned and stalked back to her room, I couldn't help but wonder if we were embarking on a path we might one day regret. But in that moment, all I could feel was a burning desire for retribution. A need to see Richard suffer as we had suffered, to make him pay for the lies that had shattered our lives. In the days that followed, I found myself standing at a crossroads, torn between the desire for vengeance and the fear of diving headlong into a path of destruction. As I pored over the evidence Amelia had uncovered, the weight of Richard's betrayal threatened to crush me. Amelia, however, remained resolute, her determination unwavering. "We can't let him get away with this, Mom," she insisted, her voice laced with urgency. "He needs to face the consequences of his actions." I nodded numbly, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. A part of me longed to see Richard suffer, to watch as his carefully constructed facade crumbled around him. But another part, the part that still clung to the remnants of the love I once felt, recoiled at the thought of such vindictiveness. "What if we go too far?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What if we become the monsters we're trying to destroy?" Amelia's expression softened, and she reached across the table to grip my hand. "Mom, we're not the ones who created this mess. We're just fighting to reclaim what's ours, our dignity, our self-respect. Richard is the one who chose to lie and cheat. He's the monster here." Her words resonated deep within me, igniting a spark of determination that had been flickering dangerously close to extinguishment. She was right. Richard had brought this upon himself, and it was time he faced the music. "You're right," I said, squeezing her hand. "We can't let him get away with this. We need to take him down, once and for all." Amelia's eyes gleamed with a mixture of relief and anticipation. "Good, then let's get to work." Over the next few days, we pored over the evidence, meticulously piecing together a timeline of Richard's deceit. Bank statements, credit card receipts, and damning emails painted a picture of a man consumed by greed and selfishness, willing to sacrifice everything, including his family, for his own desires. As we worked, I could feel the anger simmering within me, a slow burn that threatened to consume me if left unchecked. Each new revelation, each fresh betrayal, stoked the flames of my fury until I could barely contain the rage that coursed through my veins. Finally, we had everything we needed, a damning dossier of Richard's misdeeds, a veritable mountain of evidence that would bury him beneath the weight of his own lies. "It's time," Amelia said, her voice steely with determination. "Time to make that bastard pay." I nodded, my jaw clenched tight. Yes, it's time to end this, once and for all. As we stood there, united in our quest for retribution, I knew there was no turning back. Richard had made his choices, and now he would face the consequences, no matter how steep the price. With our dossier of evidence against Richard firmly in hand, Amelia and I knew it was time to take action. We couldn't move forward alone, not if we wanted to ensure Richard faced the full weight of his crimes. "We need help," Amelia said grimly, her fingers drumming against the tabletop. "Legal help." I nodded, my stomach churning with a mixture of apprehension and anticipation. "You're right. We'll need an attorney, someone who can navigate the legal system and make sure Richard can't wriggle his way out of this." Amelia's eyes narrowed, her jaw set in a hard line. "I know just the person." A few days later, we found ourselves seated across from Samantha Kendrick, a no-nonsense attorney with a reputation for taking on high-profile cases. As we laid out the evidence before her, her expression remained inscrutable, betraying none of the shock or disgust we had expected. "This is quite a dossier," she said at last, her voice calm and measured. "If even half of these allegations are true, your husband is in deep trouble." Amelia leaned forward, her eyes blazing with intensity. "Every single word is true, Miss Kendrick. That lying, cheating scumbag has been deceiving us for years, stealing from his company to fund his double life." Samantha held up a hand, silencing Amelia's outburst. "I believe you, Miss Whitaker. But belief alone won't be enough to convict your husband. We'll need concrete evidence, a paper trail that leaves no doubt as to his guilt." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "We understand. What do you need from us?" Over the next few weeks, Samantha guided us through the process of collecting additional evidence, ensuring that every I was dotted and every T was crossed. Her meticulous attention to detail was both reassuring and unsettling, a constant reminder of the gravity of the situation we found ourselves in. As our case against Richard grew stronger, Amelia and I faced another hurdle, the question of what to do about Jenna and her son, Lucas. They were collateral damage in Richard's web of lies, innocent victims caught up in his selfish scheme. "We should reach out to her," Amelia said one evening, her voice laced with a surprising note of compassion. "She might be willing to help us, especially if it means protecting Lucas." I hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. What if she's loyal to Richard? What if she refuses to cooperate? Amelia's expression hardened. Then we'll have to find another way. But we owe it to ourselves and to her to at least try. In the end, Jenna proved to be an unexpected ally, her anger and hurt at Richard's deception eclipsing any lingering loyalty she might have felt. She provided us with a wealth of information, corroborating our evidence and filling in the gaps in Richard's carefully constructed lies. As the final pieces fell into place, a sense of grim determination settled over us. We had done everything in our power to ensure that Richard would face the consequences of his actions, no matter how painful or devastating they might be. "It's time," Samantha said, her voice quiet but resolute. "Time to bring him down." Amelia and I exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between us. There was no turning back now. The wheels of justice had been set in motion, and Richard's world was about to come crashing down around him. As the days ticked by, a sense of foreboding settled over our household. Despite our meticulous preparations, a nagging doubt lingered in the back of my mind. What if Richard somehow managed to evade justice? What if, after everything we'd been through, he still found a way to escape the consequences of his actions? Amelia, ever the voice of reason, brushed aside my concerns with a wave of her hand. "He's not getting away this time, Mom. We've got him dead to rights." Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. It was as if a storm was brewing on the horizon, and we were caught in its inexorable path. My fears were confirmed one evening when Samantha called, her usually unflappable demeanor replaced by a sense of urgency. "We may have a problem," she said without preamble. "I've received word that your husband is planning to flee the country." The news hit me like a punch to the gut, stealing the breath from my lungs. "What? When? How?" Samantha's voice was grim. "From what my sources tell me, he's been liquidating assets and making arrangements to leave the country within the next few days. He's taking Jenna and the boy with him." Anger surged through me, hot and pulsing. The coward was running, trying to escape the consequences of his actions just as we were closing in. "That lying, spineless bastard," Amelia snarled, her hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. "He's not getting away that easily." I drew in a shaky breath, forcing myself to remain calm. "What do we do, Samantha? How do we stop him?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost picture Samantha weighing her options. We move forward with our plan, but we do it now, before he has a chance to disappear. We confront him, hit him with everything we've got, the evidence, the charges, all of it. We take away his ability to run. Amelia nodded, her jaw set in a hard line. "Let's do it. I'll call Jenna, make sure she's on board." As I hung up the phone, a sense of determination washed over me. We were so close, so tantalizingly close to seeing Richard face the consequences of his actions. I couldn't, let him wriggle free, not after everything he'd put us through. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity as we finalized our plans. Jenna, her loyalty to Richard long since evaporated, agreed to testify against him, providing a damning first-hand account of his deception and manipulation. Finally, the day of reckoning arrived. As we made our way to Richard's office, the weight of the moment pressed down upon us like a physical force. This was it. The culmination of weeks of planning, of pain and anger, and a burning desire for justice. Samantha squeezed my arm reassuringly. "It's going to be okay," she murmured. "We've got this." I nodded, forcing a tight smile. "I know. It's time for Richard to face the music." As we stepped into the building, I could feel the storm gathering around us, the winds of change whipping at our backs. There was no turning back now. The only way out was through, and I was determined to see this through to the bitter end, no matter the cost. The tension in the air was palpable as we strode into Richard's office, our footsteps echoing like thunderclaps in the hushed stillness. Samantha took the lead, her shoulders squared and her gaze unwavering, while Amelia and I flanked her on either side, our faces set in grim determination. Richard looked up from his desk, his expression morphing from surprise to confusion to outright panic as he registered our presence. "Dana? Amelia? What's going on?" Before he could say another word, Samantha stepped forward, brandishing a thick manila envelope. "Richard Whitaker, you're under investigation for embezzlement, fraud, and adultery." The color drained from Richard's face as the weight of Samantha's words sank in. "What? That's absurd. You can't possibly believe these ridiculous accusations." Amelia's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Cut the crap, Dad. We know everything. The lies, the cheating, the secret family. It's all over." Richard's eyes darted back and forth, his mind clearly racing to concoct some new web of deception. "Jenna told you, didn't she? That lying little bee?" "Don't you dare!" I cut him off, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. "Don't you dare try to pin this on Jenna or anyone else. This is your doing, Richard. Your lies, your betrayal." Samantha stepped forward again, her expression impassive. "We have irrefutable evidence of your misdeeds, Mr. Whitaker. Bank statements, financial records, eyewitness testimony, all of it points to a pattern of embezzlement and fraud stretching back years." Richard's face contorted in a snarl of rage. "You think you can take me down with some flimsy evidence and trumped-up charges? I'll bury you all in lawsuits, you hear me? This isn't over, not by a long shot." Amelia's laughter was cold and derisive. "Keep telling yourself that, Dad. Your days of lying and cheating are over. You're finished." As if on cue, the door to Richard's office burst open, and a trio of stern-faced security guards entered, flanked by 2 police officers. "Richard Whitaker, you're under arrest for embezzlement and fraud. You have the right to remain silent." The world seemed to slow as the officers approached, their movements deliberate and inexorable. Richard's mask of bravado crumbled, his eyes widening in panic as the gravity of the situation finally sank in. "No, wait, you don't understand," he sputtered, his hands raised in a futile gesture of surrender. "This is all a mistake. Dana, please, you have to believe me." But his pleas fell on deaf ears as the officers seized him, roughly spinning him around and snapping the handcuffs into place. As they led him away, his gaze met mine, and for a fleeting moment I saw a glimmer of the man I had once loved, the man who had promised to cherish and protect me, the man who had sworn to love me until the end of time. Then the moment passed, and all I saw was a stranger, a man consumed by greed and selfishness, a man who had sacrificed everything for his own twisted desires. And in that instant, I knew that the Richard what had loved was gone, lost forever in the tangled web of his own lies. As the door swung shut behind him, a profound silence descended upon the room, broken only by the faint sound of Amelia's ragged breathing. We had done it. We had brought Richard Whitaker to his knees, exposed his lies for the world to see. But even as a sense of grim satisfaction washed over me, I couldn't help but wonder if the price we had paid was too high. Had our quest for vengeance cost us more than we could ever hope to regain? Only time would tell. In the aftermath of Richard's arrest, a surreal calm settled over our lives. After the whirlwind of emotions and the relentless pursuit of justice, the sudden stillness felt almost suffocating. Amelia and I sat in silence, staring at the now empty space where Richard's presence had once loomed large. It was as if a weight had been lifted from our shoulders, but in its place lingered a hollow ache, the echoes of a life we had once known, now forever altered. "Do you think it was worth it?" Amelia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I considered her question, turning it over in my mind like a puzzle with no clear solution. "I don't know," I admitted finally. "Part of me feels like we did the right thing, that he got what he deserved, but another part—" My voice trailed off, the words catching in my throat. Amelia nodded, her expression somber. "Yeah, I know what you mean." In the days that followed, we learned the full extent of Richard's betrayal. The embezzlement charges alone were staggering, with evidence suggesting he had siphoned off hundreds of thousands of dollars from his company over the years. But it was the personal revelations that cut deepest. The secret bank accounts, the hidden assets, the paper trail of lies that stretched back nearly a decade. Jenna, it seemed, had been just one in a long line of mistresses, a mere footnote in Richard's sordid chronicle of infidelity. And poor Lucas, that innocent child caught in the crossfire of his father's selfish actions, was left to pick up the pieces of a life he had never asked for. As the media frenzy swirled around us, Amelia and I retreated into ourselves, seeking solace in the quiet moments away from the prying eyes and endless questions. We had sacrificed so much in our pursuit of vengeance, and now that the dust had settled, we were left to confront the consequences of our choices. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Jenna standing on the doorstep, her eyes rimmed with tears. "Dana," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I just wanted to say thank you for everything." I blinked, taken aback by her unexpected gratitude. "Jenna, I don't know what to say." She shook her head, a sad smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "You gave me the strength to break free, to see Richard for the monster he truly is. I'll never be able to repay that debt." As she turned to leave, I found my voice once more. "Jenna, wait." She paused, her eyes questioning. "What will you do now?" I asked. "With Lucas, I mean?" Jenna's expression hardened, a steely resolve settling over her features. "I'll raise him to be a better man than his father, to know the value of honesty, loyalty, and integrity. Richard may have given him life, but I'll make sure he never inherits his father's sins." With those words, she was gone, disappearing into the gathering dusk as abruptly as she had arrived. As I watched her retreating figure, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope amidst the lingering sadness and regret. Perhaps in the end our quest for vengeance had achieved something greater than mere retribution. Perhaps, by exposing Richard's lies and holding him accountable, we had created a ripple effect, a chance for others like Jenna and Lucas to break free from the chains of his deception and forge a better path forward. As the last rays of sunlight faded, casting long shadows across the room, I realized that our journey was far from over. The road ahead would be long and arduous, paved with difficult choices and painful realizations. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I allowed myself to believe that we might just make it through. Battered and bruised, perhaps, but stronger for having weathered the storm. The weeks following Richard's arrest were a whirlwind of chaos and change. As the legal proceedings ground on, Amelia and I found ourselves thrust into the harsh glare of the media spotlight, our private lives suddenly laid bare for the world to dissect and analyze. Through it all, we clung to each other, a united front against the storm of scrutiny and judgment that seemed to rage endlessly around us. Samantha, our steadfast ally, guided us through the legal quagmire, her unwavering presence a constant source of strength and support. "It won't be easy," she warned us, her expression grave. "Richard's lawyers will fight tooth and nail to discredit you, to paint you as vindictive and irrational. You need to be prepared for that." Amelia's jaw clenched, her eyes burning with a fierce determination. "Let them try. We have the truth on our side, and that's all that matters." As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the weight of our decision began to take its toll. The sleepless nights, the endless questioning, the constant reminder of the life we had lost, it all threatened to crush us beneath its unbearable weight. But through it all, we persevered, buoyed by an unshakable belief that we had done the right thing. Richard's web of lies had been unraveled, his carefully constructed facade torn down brick by brick. He would face the consequences of his actions, no matter how long or arduous the road ahead might be. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the day of reckoning arrived. Richard, his once confident demeanor replaced by a pallid, haunted expression, stood before the judge, his fate hanging in the balance. As the charges were read aloud, embezzlement, fraud, adultery, a hush fell over the courtroom. Even the most seasoned journalists and legal experts seemed taken aback by the sheer magnitude of his misdeeds. Amelia and I sat in the front row, our hands clasped together in a silent show of solidarity. Jenna was there too, her eyes fixed on Richard with a mixture of anger and pity. When the verdict was finally announced, guilty on all counts, a collective gasp rippled through the room. Richard's shoulders slumped, his head bowing in defeat as the weight of his sins finally came crashing down upon him. In the aftermath, as the media circus swirled around us once more, Amelia and I found ourselves clinging to each other, tears of relief and sorrow mingling on our cheeks. "It's over," Amelia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's finally over." I nodded, my throat constricted by a torrent of conflicting emotions. The road ahead was still shrouded in uncertainty, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I could see a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel. In the days and weeks that followed, we began to piece our lives back together, one fragile step at a time. Jenna, her custody of Lucas secured, reached out to us, and an unlikely bond of understanding began to form. We were survivors, united by the scars of Richard's betrayal, but determined to forge a new path forward. As for Richard, his fate was sealed. A lengthy prison sentence, his once promising future reduced to a mere footnote in the annals of his own hubris and greed. But even as the world around us moved on, the echoes of our ordeal lingered, a constant reminder of the price we had paid for justice. The road to healing would be long and arduous, paved with difficult choices and painful realizations. Yet as I stood on the precipice of this new chapter, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope, a belief that, no matter how dark the night might seem, the dawn would eventually break, ushering in a new era of peace and redemption. For in the end, that was the true legacy of our quest for vengeance. Not the destruction of one man, but the reclamation of our own strength, our own resilience, our own indomitable spirit. And as the first rays of sunlight peeked over the horizon, casting a warm glow across the room, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, united in our determination to forge a brighter future, one built on the ashes of the past, but rising ever higher toward the promise of a new dawn.